tell us, you try and tell us every day, and look, I am no Trump fan. I think he's a megalomaniacal, narcissistic man-child and equivalent war criminal to past presidents. But they try and tell us on all these, the neoliberal stations that he's a dictator, he's a Russian asset, he's a Turkish asset, he's North Korean asset, he's destroying the democracy of America. And then the following day they go, but pray for his safety. What? One of those can't be true. Pick which side.
Well, that just really goes to show you we are so much more concerned with feelings, and certainly the neoliberals, they're so much more concerned with being politically correct. And I mean, like, I don't wish like bad things on anyone, especially people that get followed into office by Mike Pence. Those are not people we should wish bad things on. But actually, at this point in time, they have a very short term left. I really don't think it would make one bit of difference either way.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the other thing is there's a difference between, wishing harm on someone, like, man, I hope that guy dies, and just not running around and saying, please deliver your prayers to our dear leader. To me, it's just so disgusting. But you're right that in fact, a lot of people don't like to talk about this because we've been told that Trump is this singular and unique threat to America that has never existed before. But Pence would, in many of the ways, would be equally harmful in most of the ways that they're upset about. And he'd actually probably be able to achieve it more quickly because he has a better relationship with the Republicans in Congress and a better ability to get things done than this kind of maniac who changes his mind every 3 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's sort of the Stepford evangelical version of Trump's policy. Like, that's just it. It's just, and really, I always said, people want to get rid of Trump. You better be taking Pence with him because he ain't a prize. Let me tell you. And quite honestly, where we are now, I'm looking at down the line at Nancy Pelosi, and I'm thinking, oh, good God, no. Like that's where, I mean, we're not getting anywhere better here.
Yeah. Well, as California's on fire, she said, well, whatever, the green dream or whatever it's called. She has no care for the environment. Meanwhile, people are, the outside tastes like burning now. Yeah. And you think that's not a sign that we need to change our ways?
It's amazing. I mean, look, what we know, and this is something I've noticed for a while, we have a completely non-functioning republic. Because if you had a functioning republic, then your policies would reflect the majority of the people. That by definition would be a functioning democratic republic. And so we clearly don't have that. We have people sitting in office with lower approval ratings than even like 18%, even lower than that. We have laws that do not represent the will of the people. So at this point, it's interesting to me that there's still such this push for participation in this, what is really a failed republic.
Yeah, I think increasingly, and maybe, we're nearing, 100%, the Congress, and to some degree, even the presidency, but, let's stick with Congress. The Congress is just a show of the idea that Americans are choosing what's happening in our country. But, between the gridlock and the fact that they agree on 80%, 90% of the core issues of our country, does it really change depending on Congress? I mean, nothing, the exploitation of Wall Street against 90% of Americans doesn't change. The unfettered military industrial complex goes on without alteration, no matter what it seems, no matter which president's in there. And so many of these things, 80, 90% of the core issues that really matter to the day-to-day lives of your average American stay the same, no matter who gets into those spots. That doesn't mean there aren't a few good progressives in there that are trying their best, but in general, the Congress just serves as this kind of like token, like, look, your votes matter. Meanwhile, the system goes ahead no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what I'm trying to do is transform this concept of politics into service, because that's really what it's supposed to be. And, we focus a lot on local races, on things that are happening locally, because actually those do affect people's lives every day. So I think that a lot of people get very caught up with the presidency because it's just such a circus at this point. I mean, it's somewhat embarrassing. Like I'm kind of glad that I'm not traveling because of COVID right now, because it's like we are at the uber embarrassing. Like I I would probably stitch a Canadian flag on my luggage if I were traveling right now. Like that would be, I mean, I think Trump represents us perfectly.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's something I tried to say tried to get across in my last comedy special, is that Trump is not the cause of most of these problems. He is a symptom. He is the boil that rises up, and you can go, ooh, gross. That's what's wrong with America. But he didn't create climate change. He didn't create white supremacy in this country. He didn't create the policing system and the war on drugs that has imprisoned so many.
No, Joe Biden did.
Yeah, I know Joe Biden actually is more responsible for this stuff. I was going to say the next one was going to be, he didn't create the unlimited surveillance of American citizens, but Joe Biden bragged about writing the Patriot Act. So, yeah, Trump did not create these things. He is just the representation of a completely failed system.
He's the mushroom that comes out of the ground at the very tail end of the fungus.
Yeah.
That's how he is.
I think we can put the fun back in fungus.
He's just, you know what? He just offends them. He's so offensive. And that's actually the stuff that doesn't bother me about him. Like, I don't have this rule about decorum. I care about policy. Yeah. Right. So like if he was getting us out of wars and giving stimulus checks out and supporting Medicare for all, I wouldn't care who he grabbed by what or was talking about, quite honestly.
Well, I would care who he grabbed because that's assault. But
no, I mean, but when you're just talking about like locker room talk, like, and he's just saying, this is what I did, like, that's not the kind of stuff that should be bothering us.
Right. And they actually, they being the kind of ruling elite, including the media, they use that decorum, this let's be nice to each other, as a cover so that we don't actually discuss the real issues. We don't get to the bottom of it. It is by design a distraction or a fog and mirrors to cover over the reality. I mean, it's why they don't show photos of flag draped coffins coming home anymore. It's why, despite the fact that American soldiers are in bombing in 7 countries, that we basically never see footage from almost any of it, with some very few exceptions, because it has to be covered up. Even if we know it exists, it has to be covered up. And so that's what that decorum does. It makes things seem polite, they're so horrified that Trump would say mean things about John McCain. And it's like, I would rather someone say mean things about John McCain and be actually anti-war, which Trump is not, but be actually anti-war than just pretend to say nice things about John McCain, covering over our belligerence that is endless.
Well, I mean, and what's interesting is when Trump ran, he ran on an anti-war, somewhat populist worker platform. He hasn't done any of those things. And when he is a couple of times in office made comments, oh, we're getting out of Syria. We're getting out of, and then of course the left attacks him from the right. And it's like, you can't just get out of Syria. How are you just going to get out of Syria? Look, Assad chemically bombed his own people and blah, 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 blah. And it's really weird that is supposed to be the left.
Well, I don't call them the left. I call them liberals or neoliberals, but they are to the right of Donald Trump and some Republicans on our factors of war, or our war machine. And I mean, it really shows they've succeeded at kind of taking over the entire political establishment. Neither the Democrats or Republicans stand for peace, stand for dealing with climate change truly, stand for environmental anything, stand for giving everyone health care. I mean, Joe Biden proudly says he's not for Medicare for all, proudly says he doesn't support the Green New Deal.
Won't ban fracking.
Yeah, so it's really a successful game they've played on America, that we're supposed to treat these as two completely separate parties that don't agree on anything. It's like, no, actually they agree on most things.
Most things. I always say, people, now there's a lot always talk about what's going to happen if there's going to be a third party. Where's that going to come from? How do you feel about a third party? Would you be part of a third party? All these questions. And I'm always thinking, I'd be happy if we had a second. We don't have a labor party. And that's really what this comes down to. We have 2 corporate management parties. One is just politically correct and is nicer about LGBTQ issues. But they're both corporate parties. So we have nobody representing labor. And I think ultimately that is the problem.
Yeah, and if you ever seen that chart, which basically is two lines, it's the percentage of America in labor unions, and as that goes down, inequality just skyrockets.
Of
They
course.
really correlate almost perfectly. Well, inversely correlate. And yeah, you need somebody to represent labor. Obviously there are third parties out there that get mercilessly attacked and beaten down and kicked out and off the ballots and everything else in order to stop Americans from thinking they have any choice outside of these two parties. One that is definitely doing interesting stuff is the Movement for a People's Party, which Nick Brana helped create, and they've talked a lot about labor. And he's actually, been meeting with labor leaders. And they're not, MPP is not running a presidential candidate this time around. So I think for those who are interested, who know they're going to vote in this presidential race, but are interested in learning beyond just that, MPP is doing interesting things. But it's an incredibly massive uphill battle. I mean, you're going to get no media coverage whatsoever,
I know.
and you're going to have the hardest time in the world to get on any of these ballots.
Yeah, it's pathetic. And, it's something that's always concerned me is I don't have like any sort of personal, like, I don't mind that there's parties. I think that there's a place for that. What bothers me is how they control the election mechanism. See, I don't think that the private clubs should control the electoral process. I think that it should be like, okay, this is the candidate we like. This is who we want to, put up there. But the process should be a completely independent function of those private clubs.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
that's how the U.S. ended up being what a large Harvard study called the worst democracy in the Western world. I mean, we are not first in democracy. We are very low on that list, as you've experienced firsthand. And whether it's the fact that our touchscreen machines are largely completely unaccountable, or like you're saying that the people have a massive bias while they're running these systems. There's many levels that show how poor our system is and how other countries are doing it much better. I mean, it's hilarious as the two corporate parties in the mainstream media attack Venezuela because they act like that's not a democracy. Meanwhile, Venezuela has far more legitimate elections than we do.